Hey guys, so it's Radhika here again, and today we've moved on to the next step of our ladder to the top here, our journey to medical school, and we are going to talk about the MCAT. Now, this is the part of the video series where we're really going to start breaking down what it is to give you an in-depth look. By the end of this step, you should know exactly what the MCAT is, and you'll be probably at the kind of expert level to be able to describe it to your friends if necessary. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about three things. The first thing I want to kind of introduce to you is the sections that you'll find on the MCAT. So we'll talk a little bit about its breakdown. And then once we've done that, I want to give you the structure of the exam so you know exactly what it is to expect when you're writing or if you're thinking of writing. And then we'll also talk about some of the topics that this exam, not some of them, all of the topics that this exam will test you on. Okay, so ready? Let's get started. Okay, now the MCAT exam, just to start off with some brief details about it, is going to be offered 25 times in a calendar year. Now, sometimes this is 20, sometimes this is 30 times, but in this year, 2017, it's going to be offered 25 times right from January into September. So for the last couple of years, it has not been offered October to December, but it starts off in about mid-January. It's written in hundreds or thousands of computer labs across US, Canada, and even other countries. So if you won't be here for the summer and you still intend on writing it, take a look at aamc.org, and I've linked that right here on the registration part, aamc.org. So if you're not going to be here, there's a good possibility that you'll be able to write it in another country. It costs about $305 to $355 USD, and the reason there's a range there is because the earlier that you register for a certain date, the cheaper it is. The later that you register, they start introducing other late registration fees. So you want to make sure, and this is like probably one of the most key pieces of advice that I can ever give to you, is to register early, a minimum of 60 days in advance. So I've had students who have had to write in Houston because they could not find a date, not only in Canada, but they couldn't find it somewhere close to the border. So there was nothing in Rochester, there was nothing in New York, and they had to fly down all the way to southern United States to be able to write this exam because that's the only time they could actually, that's the only location that they could actually find availability. Now that being said though, a lot of students of mine also say, hey Radhika, I'm going to write it in Florida, and then as soon as I'm done the exam, I'm going to take a mini vacation out of it. So you don't have to write in Canada. You can write anywhere. It's the same exam offering everywhere, but it's up to you. Just make sure that if you do have intentions of writing it in this country, especially if you're located in Ontario and more specifically the GTA area, you want to make sure that you register early, okay? Once you write it, the scores are released to you in about 30 to 35 days. So you have to wait for them for a bit. And you are now limited to the number of times you can write it. So you can write it 3 times in one calendar year. So in 2017, this year, you can only write it 3 times. Or you can write it a maximum of 4 times in 2 calendar years and 7 times in your lifetime. Your scores are valid for 5 years, and there are 70,000 people who write this exam every year, okay? Now, the other thing about this exam is because it's so long, it's only offered in the morning, and I'll tell you exactly how long it is in a few slides. So for those of you who are comatose in the morning, you're going to have to start practicing waking up early to be able to write an exam that starts potentially at 8 or 9 o'clock and being able to sit through about a 6-7 hour day at least, okay? So another key piece of advice, starts very early on, start practicing waking up and studying or getting those critical thinking skills working very early on in the day. Okay, now let's delve into the exam a little bit more. So the first thing I want to do is talk to you about the structure of the exam. Now, this exam is comprised of 4 sections that were scored. In 2015, it went through a major change and it got longer. Before 2013, there used to be 3 sections, and I'll tell you what the new one is. And the 3 sections that there were are shorter than they appear now. Now the exam is longer. There are more questions, which is great because there is a greater chance that you can still make certain errors, but do pretty well because you'll have more questions available to you. Simply sheer probability, sheer statistics. So 4 scored sections. One of those sections is the physical sciences section. So this section is specifically called the Chemical and Physical Foundations of Biological Systems. The next section is what we call the critical reasoning section. It is actually called the Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills section. The next one is the Biological Sciences. And what this section is formally named is the Biological and Biochemical Foundations of Living Systems. And the last one, this is the new section that they've introduced, it's the Behavioral Sciences. So they found that the behavioral sciences and having a strictly biomedical approach to studying modern medicine is not adequate, that the behavioral sciences are really, really important. And it's time to start moving to a biopsychosocial approach, where you're taking in the psychology and the sociology of each of your patients, because that does affect their health. That does affect their lifestyle, which in turn affects their health. And more medical schools have started realizing how crucial it is, and that this hasn't been an emphasis up until the last couple of years, and they really started to upplay this factor. So the behavioral sciences are newly introduced. This is the 4th section that wasn't around before the summer of 2015 when it first got introduced. This is, I guess, the main reason why the exam is so much longer. So it's actually called the Psychological, Social, and Biological Foundations of Behavior. Okay, so 4 scored sections. Let's talk about them a little more. All right, this is kind of in a nutshell what to expect on your exam. Once you're done all the extraneous stuff, going through the tutorial, going through the examinee agreement, and when you start your test, the first section that you'll see right away is the Chemical and Physical Foundations of Biological Systems section. This section is going to be 59 questions long that are going to be completed over 95 minutes over a series of 10 passages. Once you finish this, the second section you'll see is CARS. We call it CARS because of its abbreviation, but it's actually the Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills section. This is the shortest section. It's 53 questions, 90 minutes long, and a series of 9 passages through which you'll be answering those 53 questions. The third section is what most students call their favorite section. It's the Biological and Biochemical Foundations of Living Systems section. It is 59 questions long, like the Chemical and Physical Foundations of Biological Systems section. 95 minutes, so identical in time and identical in the number of passages as well, 10 there. The very last portion of this exam is the Psychological, Social, and Biological Foundations of Behavior section, the behavioral sciences. The new stuff appears at the very end. It is 59 questions long, like the other science sections, 95 minutes, and 10 passages. So what you can see is that the science sections, which are the first one here, the Chemical and Physical Foundations, the third one, the Biological and Biochemical Foundations, and the last one, the Psychological, Social, and Biological Foundations, are all identical in terms of their breakdown. They are all 59 questions long, 95 minutes over a series of 10 passages. CARS is the shortest one. Now, when you total all of this up, what you find over the 4 sections is that throughout this day, you are answering 230 questions. And that is not easy. You're doing it over a duration of 6 hours and 15 minutes, and you're going to be reading 39 passages, probably passages that you've never read before. Now, one word of caution and a huge disclaimer here is that this 6 hours and 15 minutes is just the writing time. That's just these 95 minutes or 90 minutes summed together. Your actual test day will be more along the lines of 8 hours because you'll be going through registration, you'll be signing an agreement, you'll be reading a tutorial, and there's going to be breaks between these sections. So you have to mentally prepare to be ready for about an 8 to 10 hour day, okay? 8 hours if you're writing at a testing center that's not very busy. 10 hours if you're writing at something that's really popular and there's about another 100 kids that are writing it with you that day. Okay, so let's move on. Now that you know these sections, what I want to tell you about is how, and I want to demonstrate how interdisciplinary this exam really is. So what I've got here is a table kind of listing the 4 sections on the left, and on the right, the topics that are found in each of those sections. So in the first section, that physical sciences section, the physical sciences will definitely be tested. That's generally general chemistry, no pun intended there, and physics. But what you'll also find is that you'll see organic chemistry, biology, and biochemistry concepts that are also going to be tied into this section, whether in the form of questions or whether in the form of passage information. There's going to be a twist with some of the biological sciences added to the physical sciences section. And there's a key giveaway that tells you that this will be the case. You are studying these physical sciences in the context of biological systems. That means that you must be able to apply concepts of physics to biology, to physiology, to biochemistry, etc. For cars, there are no topics that you need to know in order to do well on it. Now, another word of caution here. That doesn't mean that this is one of those sections that you do not study for. This is probably the one that will require the largest amount of your time. The longest allocation of your time will be from cars. And it's because it's a kind of skill that most of us haven't practiced. We're largely unfamiliar with it. We haven't been exposed to these kinds of passages. And through spending a lot of time here, you're kind of focusing, you're exposing yourself, and you're giving yourself the time to practice and hone in on the skills that are necessary to do well on this section. Now, the biological sciences section will focus on mostly the biological sciences. That's biology, biochemistry, and organic chemistry. But as well, they've gone and added a little bit of a twist here by making sure that general chemistry appears here as well. And again, it's because they want to make this exam truly interdisciplinary. The last section, the behavioral sciences, will test mostly psychology and sociology, but also biology. And that's because you can't study biology and psychology and sociology without the context of biology. And one of the most clearest and easiest examples I can give you is talking about the psychology of behavior, personality. So most personality theorists believe that personality comes about as a result of various factors, but they do understand that there may be a biological or a genetic component that may be underplaying those things. So you can't study psychology or the psychological and social sciences without knowing at least a little bit about biology. And you cannot make decisions for the welfare of your patient without knowing their psychologies or their sociological standards and their sociological context that they're kind of exposed to and growing up in. Okay, so the sections and the topics that are listed that are going to be found in each of those sections. So moving on then. Now, here's what I want to really give you in terms of the breakdown of how you should be exposing yourself to your studying. And that is somewhat, at least, dependent on the value of each of these topics. Okay, so This is something that the AAMC publishes. It's information that we've obtained from them, but they do put a disclaimer saying that these are what they predict a test will be comprised of, but this is not the exact value, okay? So cars as a topic is composed of 53 of those 230 total questions of this exam. It has a value of 25% of this exam. Now, when we talk about value, what we're really referring to is, and I'm going to say this very clearly and slowly, value equals the percentage of the total score of this exam, not the percentage of the total questions. So CARS has a value of 25%, okay? Biology will have the next highest, 44 questions, 20% of the value of your total score, not the total questions. Followed very closely by psychology, 16%, biochemistry, 12%. And I want to give you a note of caution here. I want to make a note of caution here. Most of the time, we in undergraduate studies, if you're in the sciences, we study biochemistry, at least in first year and sometimes in second year, as a part of biology. So if you actually sum together the value of biology and biochemistry, what you get is 32%. That kind of outranks, not kind of, it definitely outranks the value that CARS would have. And it outranks the number of questions as well. So just a note of caution there, okay? General chemistry dips down to 21 questions, making up 9% of your total score. Sociology, 18 questions, 7% sociology. Physics, 15 questions, 6%. In organic chemistry, 12 questions and 5%. Okay, now the biggest thing I want you to take away from this is it's something I've come across as an instructor teaching this exam. And it's when students come up to you and say, hey, Radhika, you know what? There's so much to study for physics. And I took physics in grade 12. I didn't take it in university. I didn't take it before writing this exam, which is fine. You don't have to. And it's only worth 6% of my total score. So I'm going to not really study for it. I'll do some of the practice questions, but I won't spend time actually studying physics or studying organic chemistry because it actually has such little value of my exam, and there's so much content to cover for me to be able to do well on it. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. Although physics is only worth 6% of your total score, or 5% of your total score in the case of organic chemistry, you have to realize that you do have to spend time going over these concepts and studying for them, probably just as much as you would for some of the other concepts and topics that you're studying for. And the reason is because you really can't afford to say, hey, it has such little value, and because I'm exposed to these topics already, maybe I took organic chemistry in second year already, and therefore I've got a pretty good basis, and I shouldn't be spending time studying for it when I can focus more on CARS. That's not a smart strategy. Although they are not worth as much as some of the other topics, your goal here is to make sure that you have stellar scientific knowledge to be able to do well on all of these topics, on the questions presented on all of these topics. So although physics will only present itself with 15 questions, or 12 questions in the case of organic chemistry, you cannot afford to not study them. Okay, you have to give them at the least a little bit of time. So read those notes. Go to those classes if you're taking a prep course. Make sure you're doing the practice for it because you cannot afford to not do well because you haven't studied those concepts. And I hope that's very clear to you. Okay, so I'm going to conclude this video here. Basically, what we've talked about today is some of the details about when this exam is offered and that it's a computer-based exam, so it's happening in labs. We've gone over the structure in some sort of a detail. I've given you the layout of how those sections appear, and we've started introducing the topics that you'll find on this exam. So the takeaway for this video is that this exam, although you'll find a physical sciences section, will be interdisciplinary, and it'll have some of the life and biological sciences embedded into it. Same thing with the behavioral sciences, same thing with the biological sciences. It is a truly interdisciplinary exam, and you have to start thinking in interdisciplinary terms. You have to start bridging all your knowledge of the various sciences together in a cohesive manner that helps you do well on this exam so that you can understand the science that's presented and you can apply the science that you've studied to get as many questions right as possible. So I hope you were able to take away lots of good information. I'm going to conclude it here. Until next time, see you then. Take care.